Welcome, Senators. My name is Rod Giltaca. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. I'm creating this video for you to provide a convenient and brief explanation of why our organization and the roughly 100,000 Canadians we represent are asking you to consider rejecting Bill C21 or at least recommending some amendments. This video is around 15, 18 minutes long. So I'd ask that you watch it in its entirety. Any statistical references I make, by the way, will be found in the video's description. As usual, everything I'm going to say to you is factually correct and supported with evidence. I'm going to provide it for you. Now, concerning the bill in its current form, our main issue is the handgun ban, and yes, it is a ban. It features confiscation without compensation for licensed gun owners, who, by the way, have legally and in good faith purchased and responsibly use these firearms. I will take for granted that you're familiar with the provisions in this bill around the handgun ban, but in case you aren't just yet, a quick overview of the particulars are as follows. Okay, those who own firearms currently can continue to use them as before, but cannot transfer or acquire new firearms or bequeath them, can't pass them down to anybody. And upon the death of the current owner or such time as they no longer want them, the government will seize those firearms with no compensation and destroy them. Now, bear in mind, these things are worth anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 or much more in some cases. And that's not right at all. It's not right. The government has attempted to avoid the ethical responsibility for this provision by allowing these firearms to be sold to a business. But a business can't resell these guns to end users or use them in any meaningful way. Thus, businesses aren't motivated to buy them whatsoever. And even if they did, they would pay next to nothing for them. They're not worth anything. And the reason is those firearms would produce nothing for the business. Can I show you that this is true? Well, we've already seen this in real life. So yes, in terms of handguns that were grandfathered back in the 1990s. So I'll give you an example. If you went into a gun store, let's say 2 years ago, you'd see modern handguns there at regular market prices, and you'd see older short-barreled handguns, prohibs, for $200 to $300, even though in some cases they'd be worth thousands. As I said, the reason is these were guns that were prohibited from back in the 1990s, so only a handful of people could buy them, and that renders them virtually worthless. This is true. It already happened, so we already know this. So this is one of the reasons why this handgun ban to the somewhere around 450,000 people in Canada that legally own handguns, or the roughly 650,000 people that are licensed to own handguns, this is all very incredibly offensive. And let me explain why a little more. First, the explanation that the government is offering to justify this new law is that there are too many crimes being committed with handguns, and that a ban is the most effective way to address it. Well, the truth is, no credible individual or organization in this country believes that a law that affects only, and I mean exclusively, licensed gun owners who are members of shooting clubs will have any effect on firearm-related violence in Canada involving handguns. No serious policy expert really believes that. So where's the proof of what I just said? Well, let me tell you. Many prominent law enforcement leaders have been crystal clear on the topic of banning handguns. I'll show you a couple of statements, including statements from police chiefs that are part of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, that have even testified in front of the very Public Safety Committee, SECU, that voted this ban through in Bill C21. Listen for yourself.
This issue is not law-abiding Canadians who want to own firearms. The issue really is people that are involved in criminal activity. You know, we need to work in ways that we can have laws and legislative change that does make it tough and prevent firearms from falling into the hands of criminals by, safe storage laws, record keeping, those types of things. But I do think it's important to understand that you're hearing
you're gonna have to wrap it up in 10 seconds.
Yeah,
sorry.
A very, very strong theme. Most people that are committing crime are with guns are criminals that don't have the ability to possess them. So it's not law-abiding gun owners committing the majority of these crimes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Chief Bray has said, I would certainly agree with the not our law-abiding citizens and the disturbing trends on gang and the data. So.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And, I think generally speaking, a lot of laws are laws that place restrictions on legal gun owners. And so I'm not going to say that there isn't a problem from time to time with legal gun owners. We have straw purchasing, for example, which is a situation where someone has a license to possess and purchase guns, purchases a large amount of them, and then sells them illegally on the black market. So that sort of thing does happen. But generally speaking, most of the laws we create are not going to be followed by the people that are committing the crimes with the guns. That's really what it comes down to. I had this conversation with Chief McPhee earlier today on the notion of a ban. A ban is only as good as the people that are willing to follow it. And, I said to Chief McPhee, we have a ban on murders in Canada, and yet we still sadly have homicides happening all the time. So I think we need to recognize and understand we need to look at the element of people that are committing these crimes.
City of Toronto's experience is the guns are not from law-abiding citizens that are being used in crime. They're guns smuggled from the United States. Those engaged in handling those firearms are not law-abiding licensed gun owners. They are criminals with no firearms license.
$3 billion. They're proposing a provincial handgun ban and $1 billion to go along with that. And I'm not hearing a single police association across the country saying that that's the best use of taxpayer dollars. They're outlining things that you're outlining as well. So again, if you can just comment with the last 30 seconds, more of where you think the best use of taxpayer dollars should be going.
So I'll address what you just addressed with the sourcing of where our guns are coming from that are harming our communities, and they're not domestically sourced. They are internationally sourced. So our problem in Toronto are handguns from the United States. So the issues around investing in what you described is certainly not going to deal with the crime problem we're facing in Toronto as it relates to criminal handguns and the use of criminal handguns. Gun violence continues to be one of the most significant public safety issues and concerns in every major North American city, including right here in Toronto, where the vast majority of gun violence is perpetrated by people who are unlawfully in possession of illegal firearms.
So very, very quickly, if 86% can be sourced and they're from the United States, would you have any estimates, and I know it's a guesstimate, on what the total percentage would be that would be sourced from the U.S.?
Oh, for us, it's 86% of all criminal handguns.
No, but that's the ones that could be sourced. I'm saying the ones that couldn't be sourced. If you had to guess at those other ones that couldn't be sourced.
Oh, I would suggest that the 13% or whatever, or 14% that's left, the vast majority will likely be American. There might be some Canadian. I can't say that's not the case. We've seen that, but we do know that the United States continues to be the issue.
But what I find most striking, in the province of Ontario, a mere 3% of traced firearms were legally owned in Canada prior to becoming crime guns. 3%. This puts into perspective how serious the illegal firearm trade has become across this city, province, and country.
I can tell you that the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police have indicated that that won't make any difference. When we seize handguns, the handguns are always almost 100% in the possession of people who have no legal right to possess them. They're almost always stolen or illegally obtained. I simply don't see, as a 27-year veteran, how adding another layer of law will make any difference anywhere in this country. When we stop somebody in this city, and police do this every single day, and they have a handgun, somehow saying that this jurisdiction, that Winnipeg is handgun free, and I'll use air quotes, is going to make it safer or easy for us is just nonsense. It won't make any difference whatsoever. There are handguns all over, they're all illegal, and they're in the hands of criminals. And that the people that legitimately own them, they're in safes and being taken to gun clubs. The two sections don't intersect.
I could show you countless videos of law enforcement officers saying the same thing. And to be fair, they don't all agree with each other, but many do. This is the reality that they see on Canadian streets. Now, some would say less guns available in Canada would mean there'd be less shootings. You can't be shot with a handgun if nobody has access to one, right? I mean, that makes sense at some rudimentary level. I mean, this is what we keep hearing. Well, for that to be true, we'd have to figure out how criminals are getting a hold of handguns and if we could actually stop them from getting them. Because if they can't be stopped by some action that we take, like legislation or regulation, then we'll have to think really carefully about this. So let's address this issue. So here again, if you listen to law enforcement, they seem to agree that almost all of these crime guns are being illegally imported from the United States. You heard them say it yourself. The percentage numbers, depending on where you get them, because it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, are anywhere from 70% to 90% of these actual crime guns coming from the United States. Police already know that. Let's call it 80% to keep it simple, split it down the middle to have a manageable number. The next number, around 20% left, right, is a toss-up between guns stolen in break-ins from licensed gun owners, which is property crime but a legitimate concern, and ghost guns. But we don't really know because the RCMP aren't keeping records on everything that we need. But anyway, in case you don't know what a ghost gun is, as an aside, they are firearms that are produced using 3D printers, CNC milling machines. They're untraceable, fully functional, illegally manufactured handguns. The criminals are making handguns themselves now. They're in the manufacturing business, okay? Now this actually is getting interesting. In a recent Bloomberg article, the authors claimed that a third of guns used in Canadian crimes and then traced by authorities were legally imported from the US, a third, legally. So in essence, that says that violent criminals are getting their guns by stealing them from licensed gun owners or gun stores, or criminals have licenses themselves. That's what that implies. It also implies that this is a significant source of crime guns. Thus, right, by extension, this source must be addressed by legislation or whatever. Now, this story was shared and quoted online by the Anti-Gun Doctors Group and other anti-gun groups here in Canada, all kinds of people. And they're doing that because it supports their view on the issue. And in turn, Bill C21 and the handgun ban. But here's the problem. If you look at the article, you took the time to read it and read the ATF tracing report that the article bases its fundamental claim on, there's a link in the description box for you, you'd find the following: that the ATF in the United States traced thousands of guns at the request of the RCMP. And they found around 33% of them were legally exported into Canada, a third of Canada's crime guns, remember? But wait, the tracing report also states very clearly, and this is important, that the RCMP didn't request tracing of any prohibited firearms, none. Why? Because if the police came across a subcompact short-barreled handgun at a crime scene or via confiscation, they already know it came from the United States illegally because you can't own them in Canada for the last 30 years. Right? They've been prohibited for 30 years. That means the RCMP never sent around 70 to 90, let's say 80% of their crime guns to the US for tracing. The ATF only received around 20% of Canada's crime guns, and those are the firearms they attempted to trace. So again, in actual reality, that meant a third of that 20% were legally exported from the US. Well, that means that the real number of all crime guns is around 6.5%, right? Not a third of all crime guns, 6.5%. Can I show you the proof that the overwhelming majority of the crime guns, let's say in Toronto, are already prohibs, right? Because that's the other part of the equation. Well, the Toronto Police Service has a Twitter feed called Toronto Police Service Guns Seized, #off the streets, or something like that. Look through the feed. Almost every single firearm is prohibited, meaning a subcompact, short-barreled handgun. We already knew that these were illegally smuggled from the United States. None of these guns, representing the overwhelming majority of crime guns, would have ever been sent to the ATF for tracing. Well, how misleading is that? And none of this stuff was difficult to look into. This information I just shared with you is the truth. It's not politics. It's not talking points. It's actual reality. So no, the handguns being used to commit firearm-related violence in our urban centers and rural communities are not coming from licensed gun owners. Even so, certainly not at a level that justifies a ban that affects exclusively licensed gun owners and at the same time doesn't lay a finger on the people doing all the shooting. It's just not reasonable. Like, this in itself doesn't make any real sense at any level. And we haven't even addressed the fact, again, the reality that criminals have plenty of money to fund smuggling operations, fly drones across the border with 11 handguns on board all day, every day if they like, which happened if you may remember. It doesn't address at any level the criminals that are manufacturing fully functional, durable handguns themselves, ghost guns, at increasing rates. And this illegal manufacturing aspect it's only going to get less expensive for them and more sophisticated, and they'll crank out more and more volume every month because they're going to just get better at it over time. You can ask Russ Miller from the RCMP National Weapons Enforcement Team. He's a real expert at this committee that you have access to. So all this to say, banning $1 billion of private property from 500,000 Canadians who are licensed, get a criminal background check every day. It's a program called Continuous Eligibility Screening, who responsibly use, transport, and store their handguns via a current labyrinth of legislative and regulatory requirements, who have participated in building over 1,400 gun clubs across the country over the last 100 years. This is generational stuff, representing billions in real estate that they've contributed to from their own after-tax money, and acknowledging the millions of hours of effort that it takes to maintain all these facilities, who travel across the country to compete and spend thousands of hours and countless dollars pursuing excellence in their sports, whose relationships, personal relationships, are with other gun people and other members of their communities. These are people whose very identity, in many cases, are inextricably linked to this property and the legal and legitimate use of it. A handgun ban affecting licensed gun owners, and licensed gun owners only, obviously, is not justified. It just isn't. The government hasn't shown evidence that this ban would stop or even slow firearm-related violence. And as you can see, the reality of this, just in the examples I've given you today, it should be pretty meaningful. And of course, worst of all, the handgun ban will have no effect whatsoever on the lives or operations of criminals. No discernible positive effect on public safety. And that's what this ban is supposed to do, right? But of course, and again, terribly, it's going to slowly extinguish the culture and identity of everyone who isn't responsible for any of this violence. So to end this off, this ban is an entirely unjustified use of government force, and that is a problem. It's a problem. Now, I can't claim to know what options you have concerning this bill there at the Senate, but there are hundreds of thousands of people watching right now that could use a little more responsible or rational behavior from our government and its institutions. So please consider what I've shared with you today. And thank you for hanging in there and listening to what we had to say. We truly appreciate it.